Okay, everyone, thank you all for stopping by. And so we are going to be finishing up our discussion review of Chapter 9 on the judiciary. And so we're actually going to, well, most of the time that we're going to take here today is going to be covering the actual Texas court system. And then we're going to take a look at a couple of, we also need to take a look at the comparison of the two types of juries here. Oh, sorry about that. Let me silence my phone. And then we're going to also take a look at some issues with the justice system, not just in Texas, but just in general when it comes to the American justice system, because there are some fundamental issues that um, have been discussed, not just in academia, but also when it comes to actual policy discussions. And so we'll go over those really quickly here also as well. So let me go ahead and share the screen so that way we can get started here. So that's what we'll start on first. We're going to go ahead and start on the actual discussing the Texas court system here. So that'll take a bulk of our time. So let me go ahead and get the share going. Let's see. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get to this here. So I mentioned before how when we're comparing uh, the Texas three branches of the Texas government to their federal counterparts, I mentioned that when it comes to the setup in terms of the way the branches are how they're assembled, I would say that the Texas court system has probably the most differences when compared to the federal system. So what I mean by this is that in the federal court system, there are only three levels. There's the district court level. This, of course, is your trial court level. This is where you're going to have what you typically see in a courtroom setting where you have a judge presiding over a case, and then you have um, the prosecutors. In this case, these would be federal prosecutors who are prosecuting prosecuting accused, the accused of engaging in federal crimes, right? And of course, the defendant, of course, will have their defense attorney. Usually, well, not usually, but sometimes they have the public defender, which we'll talk about them here later on in a bit. But it's no different than what we typically see in a courtroom setting. It's just that it's for federal cases. Then we have one appellate court after that, which is the circuit court, and Texas is part of the Fifth Circuit, so their headquarters is in New Orleans, Louisiana. And then if you are fortunate, if you have a constitutional issue and you try to appeal your case from the appellate court, it can get to the United States Supreme Court. But again, the United States Supreme Court is very selective in the cases that they take. They usually take about 100 per year, and they usually have to do with constitutional issues. So it's not enough if you just like you're just appealing because you don't want to serve your prison time, right? There has to be some compelling constitutional reason for why you're wanting to bring this case up before the Supreme Court. So, sorry, you can sleep that well aside. Anyway, but that's pretty much the way that the federal court system is set up. So it's very straightforward. In reality, you pretty much only have two levels because, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court doesn't take very many cases. So in reality, it's really only two levels realistically. However, though, with Texas, Texas is very different from the federal system. So the book says that it's one of the most complex and fragmented judicial systems of all the states, and the structure is the same as the Republic of Texas. You probably have noticed that there's this trend here, right? Where there's a lot of holdovers from previous, long gone generations, so to speak, right? The fact that legislators get paid they get paid wages that could be comparable to like the turn of the 20th century, something like that, with $7,000, not per month, but per year. And then, of course, we have this Texas court system that, as you're going to see, these are the examples of why it's considered complex and fragmented. And basically, in a nutshell, it's because there's a lot of different levels, way more than three. And there's also what's called overlapping jurisdiction. So I'm going to explain what all that means here, right? So the duplication of jurisdiction is where you have it's a situation where if let's say you engage in some sort of criminal activity, or if you get sued, depending on the amount that you're getting sued for, and depending on the cost of like the damages of, the crime, especially if it's like a property crime, your case could go to a number of different types of courts. That's what duplication of jurisdiction means, is that unlike the federal level where it's very clear that you commit a federal crime, you're going to go to district court. If you, let's say you default on a credit card or something like that, it could go to it could go to a justice court. It could also go to, one of these other lower level courts, like county court at law, things like that. Or if it's a really big amount, it could also go to a district court at the state level, not at the federal level. I know that's a little bit confusing, but the states also have district courts. So that's what duplication of jurisdiction means, is that your case could go to any number of courts and you don't know. Now, the reason why this is done, there is a logistical reason for this, because when you have, and we're going to talk about how that the counties are responsible for all these different types of courts, including the district courts, even though that's kind of like a hybrid of county and state, because they're state judges, the county, but they're still headquartered at the county, and the county still administers them. So the counties have, especially like in larger counties, like Hidalgo County, they get a lot of cases, right? Their court dockets, which contains the information of the case. Um, there's tons of cases that are going to different courts, and so what they do is they try to even out the workflow, so to speak, right? They try to, okay, if this justice if this justice of the peace judge, he doesn't have as many cases coming in, let's send him some over here. Okay, this judge over here has a few too many, let's kind of send them away. So there is some flexibility with that duplication of jurisdiction, but it does create a situation where it can be very confusing in terms of not knowing where your case is going to go to. Um, Lowest levels of courts not keeping records of their proceedings. Now, you tend to see this like within municipal courts, and the reason for this is because um, these lower level courts are not going to deal with very high profile circumstances or high profile situations, right? You're not going to have a murder case being tried by a municipal judge, right? They municipal judges and justice peace, they handle much less serious cases, more routine cases, whether it's like petty theft or, or like maybe like a DWI, or things like that, or maybe like not to say that that's not important, but it's not as serious as, let's say, like, one of these index crimes, right? So because of the lack of seriousness and the more routine nature of the work that they do, that's why there aren't records that are kept of the actual court proceedings. We'll talk about some of this right here in a bit. Some courts serving to both try cases and hear appeals, right? So some of these courts act as both. So that's interesting, because um, trying a case versus hearing an appeal is an entirely different. It's an entirely different process. That would be like many years ago when I was a middle school teacher, and they had me teaching something that I was not certified for. They had me teaching technology applications, even though that's not what my certification is, and I have no idea how that was allowed. But that was wasn't my problem. I mean, it wasn't. I it, I wasn't happy about that, because it's not something I was really all that knowledgeable about, but I had to kind of teach myself. So, but I'm just saying that like it's a situation where like if you have to, do something that's drastically different from these different roles, and of course we're going to explain how they are different, right? But yeah, when you have situations where a court has to transition from, let's say, in the morning they're going to try a case, a judge has to be involved in overseeing a trial, and then in the afternoon they have to hear an appeal. It is a little bit jarring because they are very different. Lack of standardization within the system. Again, like I said, because the counties are the ones who administer these courts, they kind of have some, a little bit of leeway in terms of, like I was saying, in terms of how to distribute the cases or things like that. But yeah, there are differences when it comes to, and of course, we also have to take a look at the fact that, and this also goes with jurisdiction varies from county to county, right? That because not all counties have the same population. Your more largely populated counties are going to have more courts. They're also going to have more specialty courts. Whereas out in the countryside, in the rural counties, they might just have like, one judge kind of doing, wearing many hats and kind of doing a lot of different things, because there's not really a need to have as many judges. And and there's not really much going on out there in the county. So again, it depends on where you live in the state, and that's why I've said that Texas is a very unique state because while it has become very urbanized, there are still lots of rural areas within the state here. So it's kind of a tale of uh, two cities, so to speak, although not a city in the second part. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to let's discuss this. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the and you really can't see this too well because it is kind of small, but this gives you an example of the overlapping jurisdiction, like I was talking about, especially down here at the lower levels. So again, you do have this overlapping jurisdiction where your case could go, to a number of these. So we'll talk about traffic tickets as an example of some of these, because this is normally where a lot of the overlapping jurisdiction comes in, because municipal courts and justice courts, a lot of what they handle are moving violations, so traffic tickets and all that. So we'll talk about those here in a bit. And then of course we've got the county. So it starts off here. These are the two lowest levels, the justice courts, which also we used to call them justice. I still call them that because that's what everybody knows them as. And then the municipal courts. Then of course you have your county level courts. There's all different kinds of courts here, like your the county court of law is referenced here. And then of course you also and then the probate court is also more of a specialty court and things like that where they deal with issues having to do with discrepancies in someone's will and where someone's um, what is the estate of this person and what goes to which family member. That's basically what probate means. When someone passes away but there's not a will, then they have to kind of the courts have to get involved and they have to decide where the assets are going to go to. The district courts, these of course are the trial level courts at the state level. So this is where you will typically see when you think of a courtroom setting, this is what you normally think of. Where you see judges presiding over a case, and you got the prosecution versus the defense. Except I know I described that earlier for federal cases, but in this case, this is for state cases. And also keep in mind that most offenses are going to be state offenses because remember that the states are the ones who set up the criminal justice system. Now, that's not to say that all the states in the country pretty much almost have an identical criminal justice system when it comes to what's a crime and what isn't. It's not like there's a state that says, "Oh, murder is not a crime." No, obviously, of course, there wouldn't be something that outlandish. So, pretty much, the different crimes that you can think of, the index crimes like your murder, your rape, arson, burglary, they're going to be crimes everywhere. Even though the states are the ones who set that, they're all setting it as the same way. So the district courts is where you actually have your typical trials when it comes to those index crimes. Then, of course, you have your court of appeals, um, where, of course, you can appeal, cases coming from district courts. Also, keep in mind the district courts also don't just handle criminal cases; they also handle civil cases, particularly more expensive civil cases. But again, we're going to talk about that here in a bit. And then Texas also has two highest courts. You got the Court of Criminal Appeals, which handles appeals from the Court of Appeals dealing with criminal cases, and the Texas Supreme Court handles civil cases, and they also have some administrative duties. We'll talk about that here right now. So, okay, let's get to the first level here. So let's talk about municipal courts. Okay, so they are authorized by the state constitution. Municipal courts are basically city courts because municipal is a fancy term for city. So they handle minor criminal matters, fines of 500 or less, no possibility of prison. So this is at the very, very bottom of criminal offenses, right? So they would handle, like I said, like petty theft, stealing something from HB or things like that. That they, if you were arrested for that, then you would go before a municipal judge. They also have concurrent jurisdiction with justice courts because, like I said, um, they share that jurisdiction where depending, and like I said, it's, I gave you all a little bit of an explanation in terms of why they do it this way, but it's still somewhat confusing. Now, I mentioned before that one of the most common aspects of the municipal and justice courts in terms of the concurrent jurisdiction have to do with traffic violations, right? So, um, and it usually does depend on like the type, like where the offense happened and the agency that's responding. So if you get pulled over by, a city police officer, right, a municipal police officer, and then they issue a citation, more than likely you're going to have to go to the municipal court because it makes sense that they would want to keep things in house, right? We're going to send you to our, city judge, right? Because we work for the city. And then for DPS, they usually will send those citations to a justice of the peace. That's normally how that works, right? So that's where they kind of have concurrent jurisdiction because they deal with the same types of offenses, but it can also determine on who is issuing the citation and where the citation occurred that could also impact that. So if let's say there's a citation that's issued outside of city limits and it's issued by DPS, then it'll go to the justice peace that is closest to where the offense happened and things like that. So okay, municipal courts also have exclusive jurisdiction over municipal ordinances. So we'll talk about more municipal aspects next week when we get to the local government chapter. But basically, a city ordinance. I'm sure you all are familiar with what city ordinances are. These are basically the laws of the city, which deal with um, city issues, which would be like some examples, of course, are like the city will have noise requirements or not noise requirements, but more so like noise monitoring requirements where, like it can't be running your lawnmower like at 3 a.m., right? Because people are trying to sleep, things like that, so they'll be responsible for those types of offenses if someone is in. I know many years ago, I think I like to share the story that many years ago, um, since I live in the Sherryland area, I live behind an alleyway, and there was this t-shirt shop, this t-shirt embroidery shop that was constantly running. I don't know if you all are familiar with those air compressors, the ones that make really loud noise. And the reason why they were running that was because they were using a water pressure water hose um, to clean up all the chemicals, from the t-shirts that they were, from the t-shirt embroideries that they were working on. So, okay, fair enough. I understand why they need to do that. But the thing was is that that thing was so loud and it was going on all day, even until like 10 o'clock at night, I could still hear it. And so I could hear it from my house. And so I'd complained for years to the city. I even went and confronted the owner, and the guy was just a total jerk to me. So I was like, okay, all right, dude, all right, we'll see who has the last laugh, because I obviously, of course, had evidence. I had documentation of like the decibel noise. And then ultimately got to the point where actually the former city manager of Mission actually stopped by our house and he wanted to apologize for this because he saw that this had been going on for years. And then thankfully he heard it while he was in the backyard with me, and then he went to go talk to them. So I don't know what he told them, but I was like, okay, like, you see, like, I had the last laugh, and then I never heard that. They never did it again. So I think they moved somewhere else. So, yeah, like I said, don't. I'm petty like that. Like if somebody like, you know, if somebody wants to act like that, okay, all right, we'll see. I tend to be rather, I tend to be a little bit vengeful. So, like so. But I mean, but I wasn't doing anything wrong. They were doing something wrong because they were clearly violating the city ordinance. So, I mean, I understand why they were doing that, but you still need to be respectful. Like what upset me the most was that the guy had no shame about it. Like he wasn't apologetic at all about it. I'm like, okay, dude, all right, I see how you're reacting. So if I have to get the city involved, which I did, so thankfully, that took care of that, and it's up to them, and it was their fault because they were just being so abrasive. But anyway, just wanted to share that personal story that yeah, that the municipal courts, because what the city manager told me was that they will issue fines to these businesses and then they have to go before the municipal court, to respond to those fines. Speaking of fines, they can impose fines up to $2,500, so it can be very costly. They don't have civil jurisdiction, so if you get sued, it's not going to be handled by municipal courts, and they do not keep records of trials. Now, like I said, most of the work that the municipal courts will do is respond to traffic violations. And the thing is that I don't know if any of y'all have ever gone through this. I'm sure all of us have at some point. It happens to all of us. We all probably get a ticket at some point. It happens. Um, what I've noticed in my experience is that when you go like to go, when you go to, like the municipal court and you go and present the citation, many times you don't even see the judge. Many times it's just a very routine thing where they check you on the system and then they'll say, okay, you haven't gotten a citation in a couple of years, so we're going to offer you like the defensive driving course. That way you just do that and that'll be taken care of. And so that's it's a very routine thing. It's not something that, so that gives you an example of how, I guess, laid back these courts are. Qualifications, of course, determined by city council. Every city's different in terms of what those qualifications for judges are. Most municipal judges are appointed, but some have nonpartisan elections. I do know that in the city of Edinburgh, they do have nonpartisan elections for municipal courts because I've seen the signs for them. So in some cities like Edinburgh, they do have these. And what we mean by nonpartisan elections is that they're not running as Democrats or Republicans or any other political party. And we'll talk about how, like, in the local government chapter, we'll talk about how mayoral races also are nonpartisan. That mayors in Texas don't run as Democrats or Republicans. I know in other states they do, but not in Texas. Usually 2-year terms, paid by the city, and highly variable salaries, of course, depending on. There's usually going to be the larger the city, the higher the salary, because of course that's going to be more tax revenue coming in, so they can afford to pay their employees, including their municipal judges, more, depending on more money is coming, and also because they're going to do more work. If you're a municipal judge in a big city, your caseload is going to be a lot larger than a municipal judge in a smaller city. So it makes sense that with that extra work would come that extra pay. Okay, let's talk about justice courts here again. They used to be called justice of the peace. I still like to call them that because that's what everybody knows them as. Um, but yeah, but the proper term is justice courts. So these are original trial courts with both civil and criminal jurisdiction. So unlike the municipal courts that don't handle civil cases, justice courts can handle these both civil and criminal jurisdictions. We're also gonna take a look at the monetary requirements here for cases that get to the justice courts. Okay, so they deal with misdemeanor criminal cases, no possibility of jail time, and minor civil cases, right? So again, these are your very minor crimes. Some DWIs are, well, there's class A, class B, and class C misdemeanors. So depending on which of those misdemeanors would not allow for jail time, that would be the jurisdiction of the justice courts here, because there's also what are called state jail felonies, where they're kind of like in between misdemeanors and felonies, where you would spend time in the county jail. So for those you would go to prison, but you would spend time in the county jail. Okay, and they also deal with minor civil cases. Okay, so let's take a look at so again, not when we're talking about minor civil cases, this means that the amount in question is not going to be very high, which it's going to explain here right now. So they have exclusive jurisdiction over civil cases where the amount in controversy is 200 or less. So that means that if it's just which that I find that funny, because if you're getting sued, it doesn't make sense for a company to sue you for something that's less than $200, right? Although it's not always a lawsuit, right? It could be some sort of civil disagreement. But I just find that funny that people would squabble for something less than $200, even though I guess $200 is a lot of money nowadays. So I guess I could see why. But it's just that the court cost is kind of outweigh. Do y'all get what I'm saying? Is that because the courts do have what are called court costs, that if you're going to um to pay for the service, things like that. Even though some people have some opinions about that, because some people might say, well, the tax, don't the taxes already pay for that service? But anyway, everybody's trying to make money off of each other, unfortunately. So, but yeah, but my point is that if it's 200 or less, I don't, it just seems odd that someone would want to, go and sue someone for less than $200, because the court costs might just outweigh that. And then they have a concurrent jurisdiction with both county and district courts when the amount in controversy is between 200 and 5,000. Okay. So again, so here's this overlapping jurisdiction again, right? That if you get sued and it's within that range between $200 and $5,000, it could go to any of these other courts. It could go to the justice of the peace, or it could go to county courts or district courts. Now, again, let me explain what they also try to do. Is they try to, like I was explaining, how they try to look at the dockets as a whole at the county level, and then they try to assign cases, to the judges that have, more availability. They'll also, and ideally, what they also try to do, and this doesn't always work out this way, but ideally, what they also try to do is they also try to make it to where the district courts, which are, ranked higher than the justice and the county courts, they'll try to give them the higher the cases that have the higher amounts of money, right? So what I'm saying is that if, let's say, you had a choice between a justice court or a district court for a $5,000 lawsuit, it's going to go to the district court because it's a much higher amount. So it doesn't always work out that way, but they try to do that. They try to make it to where the the justice courts will have the lower amounts and the county courts and the district courts will have the higher amounts. So the county courts would have, like, let's say, like the middle amount and things like that. So, but yeah, but they do handle. And again, I'll give myself as another example, because I think about 10 years ago, I think I defaulted on this credit card, and of course, I ended up getting sued for it. And I had to go to Justice of the Peace, and then they filed this judgment, and I think it was about $1,000 or something like that. But that was before I got hired as a teacher, and I was in a very big financial situation where I was like, well, either pay my credit card or pay for groceries. So, I think we all know, what anyone would decide in that case, and I think it's something that some of us have all gone through at some point, hopefully not getting sued, but having to make those tough decisions, and things like that. So, but yeah, it's a very routine thing. Not anything, it's not adversarial at all. I mean, a lot of people understand that, people go through these things. I know the judge was very understanding and things like that, even though I still had to pay, but he wasn't like trying to, like, guilt me or anything like that. He understands, that unfortunately, people have to make those tough decisions. Justice courts also may act as a notary or coroner and can perform marriages. Some of y'all are probably familiar with this. When people say, "Oh, we're gonna go get married at the court," or something like that. So the justice courts, they can officially marry people. And they could also act as a notary. Notaries, of course, are the ones who they officially. What notaries do is that I guess you could say, they officially approve, like, important documents. That's when something gets notarized. When it can be officially documented. And then, of course, coroners act as the people who will officially declare someone, legally dead. They'll note, like, the time and things like that, and so they can also act. You tend to see them act more as coroners, like in rural counties where they might not have as many people to um, perform these types of specialized tasks, because, as I said, there's not as much of that happens, and there's not enough people to be able to specialize. Qualifications for justice court. So there's no constitutional or statutory qualifications. Basically, this means that you do not have to be a practicing attorney in order to be a justice of the peace here. Only about 6% of Texas justice court judges are lawyers. So it's just kind of, it's interesting, right? It's interesting that, and this was something I didn't even know until I started, studying Texas government, and started teaching this class. That very few of these justice courts actually have judges that have that legal background, at least the legal background that is that diligent in terms of being an attorney. Because, as we talked about last time, it does take a lot of steps in order to become an attorney in Texas. Now, again, there is a logistical reason for this. Not necessarily, it's not necessarily whether people agree or disagree with this. I'm just explaining why it's done this way. Because, again, you tend to see this because, again, mostly in the rural counties, as I was explaining, that you don't have that many people available in those rural parts of the state that can, there's not enough attorneys, right? There's not too many attorneys that live out in some of these, like the Texas Panhandle, and these vast stretches of Texas, right? So you might have a situation where there's no attorneys to be able to fill these positions, right, of the justice court. So it does allow for flexibility for those important roles to be filled, because, again, you do need a coroner, right? Because the some, people are going to pass away. It might not be that many, but that's always a possibility. So you do need to have someone that's available to do that job. And there's not going to be that much notarizing. But there's still, some important documents that do need to be notarized. So that is an important role that needs to be filled, out in those rural counties. And so allowing that flexibility for for people that are not necessarily lawyers to be able to fill those positions is something that is, it does make sense. I'm trying to explain um, why this tends to happen in terms of now when you see only 6% though, that doesn't mean that 94% of these justice courts are in rural areas, right? There's plenty of justice courts that are in urban areas. So for that, I mean, you know, there might not be a logistical reason, but at the same time, you can't make it to where, okay, like only the rural judges don't need to be lawyers, but the urban ones do. So you kind of have to just be consistent. But I'm explaining that for those rural areas, that's why it does make sense. And then judges are elected for 4-year terms, and then salary set by the county commissioner here. So again, these there is some of this overlapping responsibility with the county and the state here, especially when we get to the district courts here. Or say, okay, so county courts, these are courts of record here. In large counties, they may devote full time to administration of county government. We are going to talk about how that the county judge is technically more like a mayor or like a governor, so to speak, where they run the county operations. We're going to talk about that in the next chapter in local government here. Let me go and drink some water here. Excuse me. Anyway, so okay, so for county courts here, they have original and appellate jurisdiction in criminal and civil cases. So remember how I mentioned that um, some of these courts, may end up trying a case in the morning and hearing an appeal in the afternoon. That's what these county courts do. So if let's say, and this could happen, right? If let's say someone wanted to appeal a case from a justice court, okay, well then the next level above the justice court would be the county court. So they now, of course, um, the appeals are not going to be that serious, right? It's not going to be a lot of money, or it's not going to be a very serious crime. So that does help in that the appeal itself is not all that strenuous, but it's still a different type of case, right? Because as I mentioned before, in a trial case, the judge takes and not necessarily a backseat role, but kind of observes, the prosecution, the defense, kind of, duking it out when it comes to trying to determine whether someone's guilty or not guilty, or who's liable in a civil case or not. But then in an appellate case, it's more so the judge hearing the testimony and then they make a decision, right? So in a trial court, it's the jury that makes the decision, but then in an appellate court, it's the judge that makes the decision. So it is a little bit different. Misdemeanors with fines over $500, possibility of jail time. So this would be, your more serious, So your Class C is more minor. That would be more so for the justice courts. Your Class A misdemeanors would be more so for county courts. So this would be, I mentioned DWIs earlier. That would be more so on the more serious side. So DWIs would most likely go to county courts here. Because some of these cases do have the possibility of jail time, like I mentioned, like the state jail felonies and things like that. Civil matters between $200 and $5,000, which again, like I said, this is shared with the justice courts. But again, what they tend to do is the justice courts will take the cases that have the less money. So like mine was about 1,000, so it made sense that it went to the justice court. If my lawsuit was like $4,500, it probably would have gone to the county court because it's more, because this is a higher level court, so they're going to deal with higher amounts of money because they're a little bit they might be a little bit more specialized. Qualifications. These are similar to the justice courts. In that they still do not need to they still do not need to be attorneys. They are elected to 4-year terms, not required to be lawyers, but well informed in the law of the state. So they do have a little bit more requirements, but not much. As you can see here, training may be as little as 30 hours. I believe that's per year, which we do a lot of trainings here in my work as well. I think I do way more than 30 hours of training. It's a lot of training that we do. So, and of course, pay is highly variable across counties for the same reason that I mentioned that um, the more rural counties are not going to have as much money coming in as the more urbanized counties. So, if you're a county judge over in Harris County, you're definitely going to make a lot more money than maybe like in Brooks County, where there's hardly anybody that lives there. That's the county of Fidalgo County. And then appointed by the county commissioners court here. So again, and there's different types of county courts here. which we don't have time to really go too much into them, but just keep in mind in terms of what their responsibility is. Okay, then the state trial courts, the district courts. Okay, so like I've said before, when people think of like Law and Order, and they think of, when you typically think of a court case, this is what people think of. When you think of like a murder case, this is what they're thinking of when they're thinking of that typical courtroom setting. It's the district courts located within the state. So the state trial courts are the district courts. So the principal trial courts for the state. So this is where you have, the major serious crimes. They are going to be tried within district courts. Okay. And they do have jurisdiction in both criminal and civil matters. And so I mentioned that, they're going to handle the serious crimes, and they're also going to handle like the very big lawsuits, like the multi-million dollar lawsuits, or, you know, big time state fights between, family members of like some rich, some rich business entrepreneur that passed away and maybe didn't leave a will or something like that. This is the courts where they're going to deal with the serious issues, right? The serious crimes and serious amounts of money. Although some of them may be specialized in larger cities where some of them will handle primarily criminal cases and some of them may primarily handle civil cases. But it is a varied caseload, right? So they deal with felony criminal trials, divorces. Some of these divorces can get really, really heated, right? Especially when there's a lot of assets at stake, right? Um, and then also civil suits, right? And again, this is more of your typical like big time lawsuits would be, like for like medical malpractice or something like that. Again, things that very serious types of, civil lawsuits between companies or things like that. And of course, as we talked about before, civil cases, of course, don't deal with. It's not that someone has broken the law; it's just that they are in breach of a contract, so to speak, right? Because it's an agreement between two parties, and if the agreement is not being upheld, then the plaintiff who was wronged has the right to go and seek remedy because you are not adhering to the terms and conditions of the agreement, so to speak. And then again, there is some concurrent jurisdiction with county courts on civil issues, but as I mentioned before, the way it usually tends to work is that the less expensive civil issues, like the less expensive lawsuits, will go to the county courts, and the more expensive ones will go to the district courts. It doesn't always happen that way, but that's what they try to do. And each county must have at least one juvenile court, right? There is a juvenile court that is specifically designed that deals with, and of course, what a juvenile court is that they deal with, um, underage individuals that have committed, that have committed crimes that normally, if they were an adult, they would be handled, as an adult, but because they're younger, they're not adults yet. There is a little they have to handle it with a little bit of care, so to speak, right? So the juvenile court does have to be a little bit more specialized in terms of how they are going to address these types of crimes, especially with these crimes that are very serious, right? And I've told you all before, guys. I worked for the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, so I had to supervise, some of the worst of the worst, some of these 13, 14-year-old kids that murder people, so it is something where that they have to it's something that they have to the judges definitely have to specialize in that because that is a very serious offense, but are where they have the right frame of mind to be held accountable like an adult would. So it's very difficult. That's why I probably wouldn't want to be the judge there for the juvenile court. But anyway, it is what it is. Qualifications: judge elected to 4-year terms. You can kind of see a trend here, right? That the higher level courts tend to have 4-year terms. Must be attorneys with at least 4 years experience. Although this did change recently with one of the recent Texas constitutional amendments. I think it was 2 years ago. Uh, they passed a constitutional amendment that raised those years of experience from 4 to 8. So now you have to have 8 years experience in order to 8 years attorney experience to be eligible to be a district judge. So at this level, this is where you do need to start having lawyer/attorney experience, right? Because if you're going to be dealing with very serious cases, it makes sense that you need to have a superior understanding of the law if you are going to be a judge for these serious cases. That's why for the lower courts, it's not, it's just small fines and small petty theft or whatever. they can get away with not having that legal background, so to speak. But for your more serious crimes, they do have to have that legal background. Basic salary is under 40,000, paid by state and supplemented by counties. That's why I said they're kind of like a hybrid between state and county employees. Kind of like how like school, like schools are kind of like a hybrid of state and special districts, slash local government. So even though teacher, that's why when people ask, are teachers state employees? Well, it depends. They kind of are because their retirement is through the state, but they're also kind of like a hybrid of like local entities like school districts and community college districts and things like that. Midterm vacancies filled by gubernatorial appointments. We talked about this before that the governor can fill departures from, if judges, something happens to them, either they resign or they pass away, that the governor can fill those appointments until the next election, and then they have to run for their seat to try to, stay on as judge if they would want to. Okay, so again, these are the trial courts here within Texas. Now, let's get to the appeals courts now, right? So these appeals come from the district courts, right? So this would be a situation if, let's say, someone, is sentenced to 20 years in prison, but they believe that there was some sort of procedural error. They believe that evidence was introduced that shouldn't have been introduced because, let's say, they make an argument that the police violated the terms and conditions of the search warrant or things like that, or maybe the police were saying that this was they said something about inevitable discovery where they would have found it anyway, but then the defense is disagreeing with that. Anyway, there's a lot of different ways that cases can get appealed. So with that being said, we go to the Intermediate State Appeals Court, which is called the Court of Appeals. Now, there's 14 of these courts distributed across Texas, and they do have different geographical districts. So depending on where you live, that's going to determine which Court of Appeals you belong to. So I know here locally we belong to the 13th Court of Appeals. Um, but yeah, depending on where you are in the state, that'll determine what Court of Appeals you belong to, right? And there's 3 to 13 justices per court. So again, that's another difference between trial courts and appellate courts is that in a trial court, there's only one judge that's proceeding over the case, but in appellate court, you have multiple justices that will preside over cases. And again, keep in mind um, that when we look at okay, what's going to describe it right here. So let's go ahead and continue. So these are intermediate appellate. They have intermediate appellate jurisdiction within both civil and criminal cases. So again, this is except for death penalty cases, those automatically go higher up to the Court of Criminal Appeals. They skip that step, but for everything else, they are supposed to go through the Court of Criminal Appeal. I'm sorry, the Court of Appeals first. And the way, and remember how I was saying that the appellate court is different from a trial court. This is how it explains it here, right? They consider only the written records from trial and oral arguments of counsel. So let me explain what this means in terms of how an appellate court operates. So an appeals court is not retrying the case. There's not a jury. They're not calling witnesses. It's not even really a case, so to speak. It's more like a meeting, so to speak. I mean, yes, it's formal, obviously, but it's kind of like it's more like a meeting, so to speak, because what the court is doing is you can even make an argument. It's kind of like an interview, also, so to speak, because the courts are looking at records, and then you have arguments that are made from both sides, both the defense and the prosecution, and then the judges will ask them questions, so to speak, right? So it reminds me a lot of an interview, like when I do a teaching demonstration, and then they ask me questions out of them. It's kind of as if so. I think every time if I ever go to one of those again, like I'm just gonna think, oh, this is kind of like an appellate court, like I'm appealing to to moving up from like the interview phase, to the actual like interview things like that. It's kind of thing I've mentioned to you all before that I do work at like other colleges like as an adjunct, so I do tend to go through these interviews and things like that, just to kind of supplement my income along with SCC. But anyway, okay, so then multi-judge panels here. Again, there's no juries. So what this means here is that there's 2 steps to this. So in order to decide whether to hear a case, this is usually considered by a panel of three judges. So you don't need all the judges to decide to hear a case. The same thing happens with with the Supreme Court. But then once the three judges decide, okay, we are going to take this case, then all of the judges are then going to hear it. That's what it means. All cases heard in bank, where all the judges on the appellate court will hear it. Qualifications needed: justice must be at least 35 years old, at least 10 years legal experience. Justices are elected to staggered 6-year terms. That means that every 2 years there's a group of judges that are up for reelection, and then 2 years later there's another group, and then 2 years later is the last group, and then it cycles through all over again. So you're not going to have a totally new set of Court of Appeals here, because again, the judges have these staggered elections where only a third of them are up for election every 2 years here. Similar to what we see like in the U.S. Senate, where not all the senators are up for reelection. It goes through that 6-year cycle where a third of the senators go for reelection. And the base salary is 154,000 and higher, of course, with more experience. Um, so yeah, I mean, pretty decent amount of money, although it is a lot of work that you have to do, and of course, you have to have a lot of experience. So yeah, pretty decent. As you can see here, they pretty much are on par with what the governor makes. So um, again, like I'd certainly rather do this than being the governor, because at least you don't have as much responsibility, so to speak. Okay. And then let's take a look at the highest state appellate courts here. So um, the Court of Criminal Appeals is the highest state appeals court with criminal jurisdiction. So again, this deals with, you know, appeals having to do with crime, right? So this is, if you want to, if you've appealed, if let's say you appealed that case we're talking about, let's say you were going away for 20 years, but the appeals court denied your appeal, or basically they denied your appeal. Then you could try to appeal it to the to the highest state court for criminal appeals, right? Um, they do also issue what are called writs of error, writs of habeas corpus, where they will basically look to see if, because again, the point of these appeals is to look to see, okay, was the proper procedure followed when it came to this person's rights? Were they read their rights? Did they know their rights? Was the evidence that was used in this case, was it gathered legally? Did they follow through with adhering to the search warrant and things like that? So all of this, of course, is considered when an appeal not just gets to the appeals court, but when it gets to the level higher than that, the Court of Criminal Appeals. So they definitely scrutinize everything. If a case gets that far, then they definitely have to scrutinize everything. And that's a lot of paperwork that has to be sent over. There are 9 elected judges. Again, 3 judge panels here, and then of course they serve 6-year terms. Um, Decisions can be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but as I mentioned, this is very rare. The U.S. Supreme Court is only going to look at constitutional issues. So if there's no major constitutional issue, it's just that you just don't agree with the process, then it's not going to go to the Supreme Court. Qualifications, same as Court of Appeals. Salary is higher, 168,000 to 200,000, because again, it's a level above, so it makes sense that they would get paid more and things like that. And of course, there's also only one of these courts, right? Um, as opposed to over here, as opposed to the Court of Appeals, there's 14 of these courts. So it's a lot harder to get into this one because it's just the one Court of Criminal Appeals. So it makes sense why they would get paid higher, because it's a little more prestigious. And then the Texas Supreme Court, last one here. This is the highest state appellate court with civil jurisdiction. Um, so their responsibility is dealing with these appeals when it comes to civil cases, and a lot of these appeals that the Texas Supreme Court handles tend to be like these multi-million-dollar lawsuits between companies and things like that. So there usually is a lot of money that the Texas Supreme Court is overseeing when it comes to these cases. So they do hear civil as well as juvenile cases. So again, this is the specialty court for appeals of juvenile cases, and they also original jurisdiction is limited, but they also do have the writs of error, writs of mandamus, like we mentioned. The writs of mandamus basically is where it mandates. That's why it's called mandamus. It mandates for lower courts to take certain actions, and that usually will occur when it comes to um, where the courts will make it to where they'll have to, like, the lower courts will have to send over the documentation so that way that the Texas Supreme Court can look at it and try to determine for themselves if this was a legitimate cause when it comes to appealing all the way to them. Nine elected justices, three justices elected every 2 years. Again, the staggered terms again. Qualification and salary same as Court of Appeals, but they do have other administrative duties. That's why people tend to look at the Texas Supreme Court as a little bit more prestigious than the Court of Criminal Appeals because look at all the powers that they have. They are responsible for removal of judges at the lower levels, as well as also accrediting the law schools, overseeing them, and writing the bar exams, right? So they are responsible for, so they have accreditation responsibilities for the law schools in Texas to ensure that they are teaching the standards, for the students who are wanting to become attorneys, right? So they oversee the law schools. They also, like I said, they oversee the certification of attorneys. Remember, I mentioned last time that in order to become an attorney after you pass the bar exam, you have to submit your application to the Texas Supreme Court, and then they will then approve it. Um, so yeah, they do have a lot of administrative duties here. So okay, so I know we have just a little bit more time here, so let's just talk about the juries really quickly, and then we'll end here for today. So just keep in mind that for trial juries, this is what we'll start with trial juries first because this is what we normally think of when we think of juries that they of course determine the legal guilt or innocence of defendants in a criminal trial or the liability of defendants in a civil trial, right? So again, they determine whether someone is remember they have to the evidence has to the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt when it comes to determining whether someone is going to be considered guilty of this crime. But for civil cases, it's not as stringent of a requirement. It's just called the preponderance of the evidence. So there is a chart that I want to show you all later on that shows like the different levels of those different levels of scrutiny, so to speak. And so for a criminal case, you need to make a much stronger argument and a much more compelling argument when it comes to the evidence, as opposed to a civil case where it's not as stringent of a case that you have to make. For lower courts, it's a jury of 6, and for district courts, it's a jury of 12. Again, because the lower courts are going to handle more less serious cases. District courts are going to handle more serious cases. It makes sense. It's going to be more jurors on a district court. Um, in Texas, defendants in civil cases and anyone charged with a crime may demand a trial by jury, right? So again, that is their right to do so. But again, just keep in mind that for the more serious cases, that's going to be more jurors. A grand jury, of course, works a little bit differently. So trial juries basically they decide the ending of a case because they decide whether someone's guilty or not guilty. Grand juries will decide whether there's even a case at all. It's a legal body of 12 or more individuals convened at the county seat, and then they consider evidence submitted by prosecutors and determine whether there is sufficient evidence to indict, officially accuse those accused of crime. So again, this happens before a trial even begins. But the prosecution will present evidence to the grand juries, and then the grand juries will then make a decision as to whether there is enough evidence to decide, you know what, this person probably needs to be arrested and brought before the court because we have reason to believe, that this person has committed these crimes, and we need to hold them accountable, right? So that's basically what grand juries do. So, and this happens mostly with very high profile incidents, right? Not really for routine stuff. Grand juries are going to be like for major crimes. Selected by jury commissioners, 3 to 5 persons selected by a district judge. Again, usually, like I said, felony cases. Again, these very very serious cases, and criticized for almost always acting in accordance with the prosecutor's wishes. Yeah, there are some issues when it comes to lack of access of information that grand juries have, and so because of the fact that the defense is not there, they're kind of only hearing one side of the story. But then, of course, the argument is, well, but it's not a trial, and then there's this back and forth. Well, but it didn't have to go to trial if we could have at least made an argument, for it to not go to trial. So it's all a bunch of stuff. But there are some controversies when it comes to grand juries. So I know I wanted first to get into a little bit more about some of these criminal justice. We're gonna have to stop here for today because it's already gonna be time to go. So let me go ahead and stop the share here and stop the recording.